Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker. As always, I'm your host, Russ Downey, and with me, as always, today is Danton of Doc Rocker Music. Danton, how's it
Hello.
going?
Good, Russ. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm a little tired of shoveling snow, but I wouldn't mind seeing some more before it finally goes warm for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Big reason I chose to wear this shirt is, dress for the environment you want, not the environment you have. And I'd much rather be like at a picnic somewhere, you know, than shoveling snow. It's been a nightmare.
So what you're telling me is you made the tablecloth into a shirt.
I made the tablecloth into a shirt. Yes.
Perfect.
And I'm very excited about it. So yeah, today we're gonna do a method book review, just like we did. Those of you that follow the channel, you can check out the first episode of the method book review. We talk about the Tommy Igoe Groove Essentials drum lesson book. Today we're gonna kind of switch the ball over to my court a little bit and cover more at what's in my domain of piano, and we're gonna talk about the Bastien piano basics. And I'd like to give just a kind of brief overview of the series itself before we get started on the main topic for today. So I'm going to pull up just you can find a link. If you Google Bastien Piano Basics, it'll take you to this site, not my Zoom site, but the Keijo's site, which is the up-to-date version of where you can find and access all of the Bastien Piano Basics materials. This was the series that I used as a student. It's one of the series I use as a teacher as well. And in recent weeks, I've really fallen in love with the primer level books, and there's a few different examples that I'm going to kind of showcase today. But basically, it breaks it down beyond the primer level. It goes up to level 4 that are all color coded, and they all basically have 5 key components of your main lesson book, which is labeled piano. Then there's a theory supplemental book, which, all your like worksheets and, you're figuring out things how to read the staff, how to outline chords, tonic and dominant function, all that sort of thing. The performance series are also really great, more challenging pieces, a lot of really great kids recital material. And I actually use these performance books with some of my adult piano students, and they love them because they kind of cut right to the chase. And here's like a nice big song that has a lot of different varied content in it. Technique is another great supplement. The thing I like about the Bastien technique is that all of the technique songs are written in correspondence to the material in the main lesson book. So it's all, instead of just kind of mindlessly fingering up and down scales, it's more things that are directly specific to the songs that your student is learning, which I really, really like. Then they also have a line a day sight reading, which I've honestly never used. It's probably part of the reason I'm such a poor sight reader. I never did it as a student. And I wonder if they actually show those up. Yeah, here we go, line a day, which they have one for each level, which is great, and they're all color coded. And there's, again, with so many other like famous piano series, there are so many other various supplements. They have tons and tons and tons of content, but we could easily be here for hours, and I don't want to take up that much time. We're going to get right into just looking at the primer books. Now, what I like about the primers is it's a little different than a lot of other methods that are out there, where it's like, here's just like your kind of preschool level stuff. Here's your basic before your kids are even reading staff. Here's simple, short little songs. In the Bastien case, they actually break it down into 2 different versions. I just call it the red book and the pink book. Now, your main pink book for the primer level is better targeted to older kids. So, like 8, 9, 10, even if they've never had a lesson before and want to get into piano, this is a really good go-to. It moves at a pretty quick pace. And I'm going to showcase some of the songs and some of the content of the book in a little bit. But another option you can have, especially for your younger kids, are the red book actually breaks it down into A and B. It pretty much chops the primer book in half and spends a little bit more time with each topic. And I'd like to showcase those as well. I've had, especially with my youngest piano students, 4 or 5 years old, I've had a lot of success with Bastien Primer A, because, and I'm going to get into why. So let me switch over to my piano. Russell, did you have any thing you wanted to comment on or question about before we kind of dig in?
Well, the one thing I do like is, similar to some other piano book series out there, it kind of has the main book and then a supplemental book series. I really like the idea of the sight reading one because I know some other series do that as well, but I like the fact that it's, definitely a prominent part of their series of what's there, and that the technique book goes along with what's in the main book and isn't just like a skills type of book, almost like similar to what like an advanced Rubanks would have been, where it's like all scales and all exercises, meant to build those skills. I like the fact that it does that. I do like the fact that the earlier books are geared more towards, like you said, that the one primer is geared towards like 7 to 9, and then the other ones split into A and B are for younger learners. So I'm guessing about 7, like 4 to 7, I would say, give or take.
Pretty much.
And the one thing I like about that is that I've used the Alfreds quite often. And that series, I would say, at least the ones I've used, it's a little bit all or nothing. You either use the regular ones on the regular series, and it's more for like 4 to 8 to 9-ish, I would say. But past that, it gets to be a little kind of corny looking, like it's a little bit childish for some of the older kids. So I usually skip up to the basic adult all-in-one series, which can be a little bit more of a jump because that can be a little bit more difficult to do. So I like the fact that they keep it a little bit closer to the vest with the two sides of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I've found, like I said, especially in recent weeks, working with some new students and kind of getting back into using these books for the first time in ages, it's definitely a noticeable difference. Just even considering the age of your students can be pretty much the deal breaker of whether or not to go with the main primer level or the break it down into the A and B. And the A and B naturally is going to take more time because you're going through 2 books to get through primer. But by the time you finish Bastien Primer B, you're perfectly well prepared to start level 1, just like someone who just did the regular primer level. So yeah, they and it's something I say with my kids all the time. All these books, they all teach the same thing, but they have their own different unique ways of doing it. But that's more topic for another day. Let's get into this. I'm going to switch over to my piano, and I'm going to showcase the main primer level book first to give you an idea of what the Bastien series is all about. They establish it really well as early as this first book. What sort of content you're up against. So just set all these up on my stand here and make sure my light stays on. Thank you. All right. So as I said, another nice thing about the Bastien catalog is they have a huge array of supplementary materials. There's stuff for virtually every holiday. There's duet books. There are additional solo pieces that are all written or arranged by the authors, James and Jane Smyser Bastien. They're, aside from your main 4 levels and your primer level, there's so much other content that you could find in this library, and it's all fantastic. Hymns, Thanksgiving, nursery songs. Some of these I have and I use as additional material for my students, for sight reading or even for performances, having extra recital pieces. So when you start off with the primer level, this is what's called the multi-key approach. And a lot of piano methods do this, where, you learn a whole set array of pieces and skills in a particular key, and then that gradually gets transposed over time. So you have a lot of kids doing things in like a matching C position or a middle C position, doing a bunch of stuff in the key of C. And then as you start to explore the introduction of sharps and flats, they then move to things in the key of G and the key of F. And at that point, you're pretty much already in level 1 in Bastien. So you're not going to see too much of that in the primer level. I believe there are a few songs that do introduce sharps and flats. I know they definitely do in Primer B. I actually haven't used this primer book all the way in its entirety yet, and I'm really excited about eventually doing so. So yeah, they do introduce sharps and flats by the end of this. So looking at the very, very beginning, it's real short and sweet and simple and to the point. There's also a really nice handy dandy table of contents that also shows the supplementary books and what pieces and pages correspond with each other. So you can really clearly map out a chart, a course of action for yourself or for your students if you're a teacher. Really nice, simple, here's how you properly sit, nice clear image, and it's all hand-drawn artwork, which I think is really, really pretty. Nice simple bit on the fingerings, and then right away by page 6, we're identifying all the notes. We're finding our groups of 2 and 3 black keys. Clarifying low to high pitch with your students, and knowing which side is your low notes and which side is your high notes. That can be surprisingly tricky for some students when they first start out, because we associate the words low and high more with volume as music listeners and not so much as music players. So yeah, and by the time we start playing pieces, it's a real simple, like all the songs are 4 measures, they're very, very simple. A lot of it's pattern based, which I think is actually a very good thing, especially for a young beginner, to already teach that skill of looking for and identifying patterns in pieces of music, because that's going to carry them literally all the way through their music journey, even at the most advanced stages. Looking for basic things that repeats and finding patterns is really, really nice. So we have this first little march, and sometimes the artwork, as beautiful as it is, sometimes it can get a little in the way. That's one thing. If I had to critique it, sometimes it's, and a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times working with a student, asking she or he, do you have any questions about the piece of music? And the questions usually involve things of, why does that man have so many balloons? And why is that French fry playing a flute? And it's, sometimes it can be a bit distracting, but it definitely makes it fun. And you can see right away, like they don't have anything about staff or time signature or anything like that yet. They gradually introduce those concepts after you establish a few basic pieces. So looking at these 2 songs, the first march is set up for the left hand on a low group of 2, and it's a real simple. And since it's only 2 notes, it's really, really good for teaching steady beat, which is something I'm a very, very big proponent for, even in beginner piano lessons. Balloon Man is the same exact concept, but it's right hand for 3. And the first several songs all use black keys, which is really nice, because you could always, something I like to do as a teacher, have your students, experiment, play it in a different octave than where it's written, or play it with your left hand instead of your right, or vice versa. Because you can right away get your kids all over the instrument, and really get to know the instrument. And since the black keys are so accessible, they all stick up over the white, they're all easy to find. And a lot of times you could already, as a teacher, have your students focus on not looking down at their hands to help even better facilitate good music reading skills. Let's see. So there's a few short examples that use black keys like this. They have a nice arrangement of Mary's Lamb. They have tons of original content. And they gradually, so that we go from just quarters and halves to then we get wholes, then we get repeats, and every page they're introducing some new concept, or they're applying it in a greater musical context, like this time Old MacDonald. Really, really great example. After Old MacDonald, I believe we get into actually finding the letters, and they just do a real simple, just tell you the letters and have your hands fit C position for most of the book, if not all of this. So I know, once again, comparing to Primer B, which I'll get into soon, there is some different positions. So I would assume there would be for this one as well. But yeah, real simple things where you just identify the letters, and they have a whole nice, all the songs have lyrics. All the songs are numbered for fingers as well. And they always remind students of these several different practice steps they can take when they're reviewing and rehearsing the music on their own. And I always like to enforce this for my students, first just simply clap the rhythms, then try focusing on saying aloud the finger numbers, say aloud the letters you're playing, do the same thing with your rhythms, try to sing the words as you play. And all that time, especially getting a piano student to sing along as they play is really, really helpful for many reasons. And I like that they push for that a lot. And it gives you a lot to go with in these short, simple examples, playing through it 6, 7, 8 times and doing all these different sorts of skills. It's a really great way for a teacher as well to assess their students' strengths and weaknesses. Who's more visual, who's more of a letters kid, who's more of a numbers kid, who's more of a hands-on kid. You can really get to know your students very quickly by using this book. So there's tons of examples.
Now, you mentioned that the majority of the book is without being on the staff, right?
Um, I would say just about the first half of it, but
Okay.
they give you lots of material here. And then after we get our hands on the letters and start identifying notes by letter name, then they introduce the time signature. And I like this book that starts with 2-4. I think that's a really, really smart move. I know a lot of methods out there focus on 4s or 3s. I like this one starting with 2 because you can pretty much break down all of the examples that are written in 4. A lot of them are usually set better as sets of 2. So introducing that and just having your students count aloud 1s and 2s as they play with your basic discerning quarters and halves. And they just do a cute little trick here where the stems up indicate right hand and stems down indicate left. And again, personally, as a teacher, I like to mix that up a lot. I'm a strong advocate for wrong hand playing. Let's do all the stuff opposite, just to really play with that, crossing those two hemispheres in your student's brain, especially if they're younger, because they, well, even with older students, if they're doing this book, they're going to have, so many life skills that they have developed at this point in their lives. Not many things they learn use both halves of the brain simultaneously. So I really like that about this book. It's a great challenge. Let's play the whole right hand part lefty and say the letters. Let's play the whole left hand part righty and say the numbers. Let's do opposite hands and sing the word. You could easily just create so many different varieties of how to play these pieces. Then they introduce 3-4. Then they introduce 4-4. And I want to say after that point, then they introduce the staff. So we'll get into that. And they give you a nice clear-cut set of instructions of how the staff is built and how it works and how to read it. And then they introduce the staff one at a time. So first we get treble staff, bunch of examples of that. Bass staff, same idea. And then they correct themselves on the stem directions. Now that we're using the staff, it's written more properly. And for right now, to get students started, they still supplement and kind of give you the cheats. They kind of have the letters written in, but then they start to strip them away with something that a student will recognize, like Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Once they have introduced the treble and bass staves separately, then they have some real simple short songs to introduce students to reading on the grand staff. And then the whole latter half of this book is marked with introducing different things like sharps, flats, slur technique, staccato, things like that. And by the end, let's see, at the very, very end of the book, some of these songs are also included in A and B as well, but there's plenty of unique content to this one as well. Let's see.
While you're looking there, the one thing I do like is the fact that there is a good bit of overlap, it looks like, between both this Bastien primer and the Alfred as well, which I'm somewhat familiar with myself from using to teach. I do like the idea that they start without the staff and then it's both hands separate, then together before they start introducing the actual staff itself. And the nice part is that with the grand staff in this book as well, they introduce it, but they don't put both hands together at the same time as soon as they start, which is a good way for students to get used to reading two at the same time without getting too confused to begin with.
Absolutely. And in this book, there's a lot of variety of that. A lot of the songs give you these nice little warm-ups, especially when teaching a new technique, which is really nice. But there's a lot of variety of let's play an entire phrase right hand and then an entire phrase left hand. Let's alternate hands every bar. Let's do some real simple examples of both hands playing together. There's a lot of variety, and that's one thing I really like about the Bastien is there's a lot going on for the left hand that you can't always say. It's always so hard to get students to play everything lefty because, naturally just the nature of the range of that part of the piano, your left hand is naturally fit for more accompanimental things. So it's really good for even just little bits here and there, having the left hand actually playing some melodies. And there's also a good balance of things in major key, things in minor key, things that are a little more modal. Like they play a lot more with rock tonalities, kind of like playing with, your flat sevens or your flat threes and things like that. Yeah, really, really fun stuff. Electric bass is featured in, I've done this one a lot in Primer B, so it's nice to see it here in the main Primer book, but that one is really, really, it's simple. It's all left-hand melody, which is what I was just talking about, a really good example of that. So, and we're set to G position. It introduces flats, slurs, staccatos, varied dynamics, and a repeat. So electric bass sounds kind of like this. Just having one little position shift like that, introducing a nice crunchy second, ties in the left hand as the right hand does responses to the melody. It's so simple, but it is so effective. I absolutely love it. And kids always have a smile on their face when they're playing stuff like this. Again, the pictures are goofy and silly, and that's all part of the fun. By the very end, there's also a lot of references to Native American music, which that could be kind of questionable, given the current learning environment and exercising more of an air of political correctness. So you sometimes have to have that conversation with your students and with their parents. So that's one thing. Maybe I don't know if it's so much of a strike against the book. And personally, I think a lot of the Indian music they write is really, really fun and interesting, and it creates a lot of really great recital material as well. A lot of stuff where we have both hands moving together, real simple stuff. But
this is something that a lot of you out there who are music educators will find with some of the books that were written more towards the 80s and the early 90s. Some of this material that we would consider to be an outdated way of referring to things, or things that are not, something that is considered politically correct today, can still be found in these books. And like Danton said, the music can be valid, but what's written there may not be. So that's an important discussion to have with the parents of your students, to make sure everybody's all on the same page with it.
Yeah, and I've always found a way to turn it into something positive and create a healthy conversation about cultural diversity. Especially in my particular neck in the woods, I have a lot of actual Indian clients that I teach. So that's always, for me, I always turn it into something kind of fun, like how is this Indian different than you, and different, that sort of thing, and talking about the different cultures from different parts of the world. And that whole affair with Mr. Columbus and our misconception of what Indians are, it can create a really interesting historical conversation. So by the end of it, you put it all together with a rendition of Jingle Bells, which is a really nice, simple way. Jingle Bells is one of those holiday carols that is done to death. You'll see this in every single piano book, but I think it's justified because there's a lot of really great teachable moments in a piece like Jingle Bells. And I've seen so many different versions of it in different books that it's nice to see it here, treated in a much simpler way.
Now, I noticed that they basically ended up this point with just introducing eighth notes towards the end.
Yeah. I'm not even sure exactly when they introduce it. That's a really good question. Let me backtrack a bit. But they do introduce eighth notes at the primer level.
Gotcha.
I think I want to say that eighth notes are part of primer B in the split for the younger kids.
Okay.
I could be wrong about that. I'll have to double check. But yeah, here we go. So they introduced eighth notes shortly after the grand staff.
Okay.
And one of the songs they use for that is "Skip to My Lou." So yeah, which is nice. You could have, and especially with Jingle Bells, you can, depending on your teaching style, you may want to get into talking about swing versus shuffle eighth notes, depending on how you want your child to play Jingle Bells. Something that I think actually makes this version really, really accessible is it takes out the secondary function.
I was about to ask about that.
On that first phrase, because that could be a little tough with a younger kid, having that E rub against a D, I can't tell you how many times I've had students that kind of doubt what they're doing there and question what's going on. So they just simplified it to all ones and fives. At the discredit of the left hand being more interesting, it plays it like this. So it's simplified, and I think
I can tell you from experience, the Alfred's books do that as well. They take out the secondary function so that it is much more understandable for a beginning piano player.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more digestible, and it makes it a lot more, like I said before, accessible. And then, of course, in true wonderful piano book fashion, there's a nice big beautiful certificate that you can initial and sign for your student, and have them hang on their fridge, and then you can move them on to the next level, which is great. So the primer level is really, it's funny, like even with my older kids, I tell them like, look, it is the primer, but don't take it as like something for like real little kids. This is like, it's going to introduce everything that you're going to need for levels 1 and beyond. And by the time you're at the end of it, you're more than well prepared. And at least the first few levels of the Bastion, like 1 and 2, I would say move at a pretty considerable pace. You know, they introduce lots of content very quickly, and they reinforce it with lots of examples, which is what I really like. I mean, as a kid, I loved it. As a student, the later levels I didn't like as much as a student, but you know, it's a matter of, you know, as a teacher, it might be a little bit different. But before we wrap up, I'd like to briefly take a quick look at the A and B versions as well, because it's all the same topics. It's all the same, you know, how it's introduced, it's all exactly the same. By the end of Primer B, your students are reading the grand staff, they're playing in multiple positions, they're using sharps and flats, they're using varied articulations and dynamics. Dynamics are introduced, I want to say, as early as Primer A, you know, basic differences from playing forte and piano. So let's look really quickly at Primer A. Funny enough, the first two songs, despite having different subject matter, it's melodically exactly the same thing. So we get Two Black Cats and the marching song, which I just something about this this marching band of vegetables. I just absolutely love it. I don't know. But yeah, Two Black Cats is exactly the same as the first march, but the lyrics are different. The artwork is different. So especially, you know, if you're teaching a family of multiple children, having, you know, like younger brother, younger sister have their own special book is another nicety of the Bastion series. And they, even if they're playing the same stuff and learning the same skills, at least they have some way to make it more their own. You know, you can play your song about the balloon man. I'm going to play my marching song. And even though it's the same exact, you know, it works really, really well. And I've been having a lot of fun with it with students. So Primer A takes a lot more time with the letters, and it introduces them in smaller increments. So it only does the first 3 letters of a C scale. And it centralizes a lot around what we eventually get into as middle C position. So you get a lot of songs, right hand thumb, middle C. Like, for example, Rain, Rain, which is different than the traditional Rain, Rain. And after a few examples with the right hand, they do left hand thumb on middle C with songs like Clouds. And after, I want to say, several examples of this, they get both hands on middle C together, I want to say. It's been a while since I've used this. Oh, and something else that they do is they introduce one additional letter at a time. So, actually, no, scratch that. They introduce first right hand 3 finger, then they get to 5 finger, then they rinse repeat for left hand, and then they start putting both together. And what's cool about this is they still do Old MacDonald, and it's structurally identical to the way it's presented in the primer, but it's introduced here much later using the key of C rather than the key of G flat. Gotcha. So it's kind of cool, and especially this is a really great example. And one thing I think here in this case, the artwork really supplements it well because it gives you a lot of ideas of having your student repeat the song using different animals' names. And that always makes for a very, very fun piano lesson where, you know, what animal do you want to sing about on the next repeat? And okay, dog, woof, woof here, woof, woof there, you know, cat, meow, meow here. And I always like to channel my crazy side and have a little more fun with it and make the animal sounds really goofy and, you know, really help break the ice with your kids. It's great. Tons and tons of songs that, you know, and they do the same kind of stem trick that the primer does for using right and left. And all the songs in this at this point in the book are really evenly distributed across your right and left, so it creates a lot of good technique right away as well. And by the time you finish Primer A, they introduce the time signatures at much slower increments as well. Instead of page to page, they do like a whole bunch of examples in 2, a whole bunch of stuff in 3, then a whole bunch of stuff in 4. Which is nice. And they introduce the staff the same way. So just the right-hand staff and they go back to just doing 3 notes instead of 5. We're not quite doing a pentascale yet, but you will be by the end of this book, I'm pretty sure. few extra supplementary examples to show different sorts of melodies that can have repeating pitch. Then we rinse, repeat those steps for the left hand, at which point then we start to do both hands only using 3 notes. And again,
Oh,
lots
okay,
of
that's
stuff
good.
like
Giving
this.
time to kind of think about the next one. That's good.
Yeah, a lot of variety as well. You know, a lot of stuff where, like I said, it's so hard to find really good left-hand stuff in piano books. I think the Bastien series treats it really, really well. And then by the time they get into more than just 3 notes, they also talk about intervals. So, you know, as I say with my younger kids, skips versus steps. You know, so melodies that are constructed with combinations of seconds and thirds and unisons, you know, repeating pitches. By the end of this, we're doing some holiday themed stuff, but not explicitly holiday music until we get to, I believe, Jolly Old St. Nicholas is the end of the book before the review. Yeah, a little review worksheet, some extra staff paper that I honestly don't really think is all that useful. And then, of course, your certificate. But yeah, looking at Jolly Old St. Nicholas, another great example. Lots of left-hand independence. There's lots of, you know, teaching the student right away. Make sure you're always zigzagging those eyes across both stabs so you know what's coming next. And when you're ready for primer B, they pick up right where you leave off. So you're looking at grand staff, and they introduce it with a really accessible version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star set to the key of G. And something else that you other piano teachers may want to consider, if you want to maybe kind of bypass some of like the real kiddie stuff in the first primer book, like some of those like First March and, you know, their version of Old MacDonald and things like that. An option you do have is you can start a brand new student on primer B, especially if they have, depending on the student's background, you know, if they've taken lessons before, maybe on another instrument, or if they have someone in the family who also plays. I remember when I started piano lessons at the age of 8, and I started on this book. My teacher opted to skip primer A entirely because I was a little older, and my whole family is musical. So my older brothers played, my mom played, so I had a lot of extra help at home with practicing to really be well on my way with this. So that's another option, another consideration. Jumping right in on primer B, which is grand staff. Multi-key approach, once again. Right away in primer B, they introduce the 8th notes as pairs with several examples that use them. You got your matching C position, all 5 fingers. And that's another thing they do really well. There's lots of variety in just these basic 5-note arrangements, but you also get melodies that change direction really frequently, like Little Engine, changing dynamics with the frog and the bee. Really, really nice stuff. And then they talk more formally about intervals, which I think is never really too early a time to do that with your students, especially piano students. I think they handle that really, really well. Tons of songs that introduce thirds, tons of songs that introduce fourths, tons of songs that introduce fifths eventually, I want to say after here. Yeah, 5 Toy Soldiers, My Son John, Robbie the Robot has an awesome design. I love the way he looks. Same idea. And the nice thing about this, it starts with the left hand. Simple stuff like that. Lots of variety with the intervals, lots of variety with the hands, lots of variety with the subject matter. You get a lot of really great, crazy fantasy topics. You get plenty of realistic stuff. You know, another thing that the Bastien series does, well, not even just the Bastien series, you could credit a lot of, you know, the Faber series does this, the Alfred series does this. There's a lot of really fun songs that introduce whole tone scales as a great introduction for sharps and flats. So looking at something like Floating Clouds, which has this nice, you know, really, really simple. Something with a bit of a different flavor. Get your students out of just major and minor. And stuff like this you could always supplement by having them pedal depending on their setup, if they have like a keyboard and a pedal or an actual digital piano, or if you're really lucky and get a student that has a true acoustic piano in their house already, that's always fun too. You can introduce the pedal. I don't think they teach pedal explicitly. I always like throwing it in because just like with intervals, I think it's never too early to get students to play around with that idea. Once again, there's a lot of this Indian content, which you have to kind of tread carefully with, but it's great for introducing harmonic intervals, varied rhythms with rests. They introduce a ton of songs that use staccato technique, and then they vary it a lot with legato phrases. And some of the songs, like I said, pop up in the primer book too. I did a lot of my teaching with these books for years and years and years before recently picking up the primer to use with my students. And I've been loving the whole set. It's been a lot of fun. And by the end of it, here's electric bass. And then the final, Old Mother Hubbard is just surprisingly sad. They have this really, really like dark, slow minor key kind of thing, which I think is kind of interesting. And there's the first half of it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, really, really cool. Like I said, variety is the spice of these methods. There's tons of variety of the musical material. There's tons of variety in the lyrical content. By the end of it, they're doing this Little Indian Brave, which is, as a student, it was one of my favorite tunes to play. As a teacher, I have so many students that I've taught over the years that have all just fallen head over heels for this song. And I have kids now that are level 1, level 2, level 3, and they still go back and play this because it's that much fun. It's a huge recital hit, for you teachers that are doing recitals for your kids. It's a real fun recital piece. And at this point, I've been doing it for 20 plus years, and I still love playing this song. And then the opening chorus repeats. It's fantastic, and it's a simple enough left-hand accompaniment, but it has so much energy and flair to it. Kids love it. I love teaching it. My kids love playing it, and I think it's really great prep work to get you set for level 1 when you're ready. So there's my basic, just a kind of demonstration of what the book's outline. Like I said, the whole set I would highly, highly recommend. I have the whole Bastien library. All 4 levels. Most of them are from when I was a student, but I picked up other copies to use as a teacher over the years. And it's one of the big 3 for me. Bastien is right up there with Alfred, with the Piano Adventures series by Nancy and Randall Faber, which we're going to do another podcast on in the future. And it's great. Like I said, the big selling point for me with the Bastien primer level is that there's the different options you have. If you got younger kids, if you have older kids, if you have families, there's something here for everyone. So that's pretty much it with the Bastien as far as the primer level goes. I'm planning with this Teacher Talk method book review series to cover the other levels in pretty much as much detail, demonstrating a few examples of pieces and showcasing, things I like or maybe even don't like about the books. So there's plenty more where that came from. We're going to have a lot to talk about between drum books, piano books. We're going to try to cover other instruments too. I'm really excited about our new journey.
Same. And, it was interesting to see like what the similarities were between that series and the Alfred that I've used to teach. And there are definitely a lot of similarities. I did notice what seemed to be a little bit more forethought accounting for like when students first learn how to play in the grand staff, giving them time to kind of think and look to the bass clef versus the treble or vice versa, which I really like seeing in that. It does definitely spend more time without the staff before it's introduced. So that part definitely I think is better for younger learners without a doubt. But I like what the book does. It seems like a good, comfortable progression. I do like the fact that it does do some whole tone stuff. The Alfred doesn't do a whole lot of that, so it's nice to hear it every once in a while. But like we said in the middle of this as well, it's important to note that this book was written in 1985. There is some outdated material and some outdated terminology. And, in that case, you want to make sure that you discuss that with your students, and you just discuss that with your students' parents to make sure everybody's all on the same page with that. That's very important. But the book series itself seems like a great book series for piano. So I'm glad to see it. This is my first time seeing it, so it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I'm looking forward to sharing more of it. Like I said, I have pretty much the whole catalog on my shelf somewhere. So
Somewhere.
it's going to be fun.
All right, well, that wraps up this Method Book review. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're out there getting a chance to view either Method Book reviews or bits on pieces or any of the Teacher Talk content, make sure that you like, or you can comment. You can even subscribe to our channel, Pansy Podcast Productions, or even just share it somewhere on the internet. Anything is great, and all interaction is welcome. So I've been Russ Downey. Thank you, Danton, for joining us today, and we'll
As
see you
always.
in the next one.